Welcome to Millennials Meet Liberty, your source for searing hot libertarian takes on the world's weekly headlines. Here's your host, Colt Thompson.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to yet another edition of Millennials Meet Liberty with your host, Colt Thompson. Here we are, episode number 17. So, bright and early this morning, I decided to fire up my recording, and here we go. Typically, I do these things in the afternoon, so I apologize if my voice is a bit groggy, but onward we go. So, today's episode will be a little more juicy than typically anticipated. I have just been overcome by the wave of news stories coming out about this whole George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin scandal, and really unbelievably crazy story popping back up into the headlines over the past few weeks. So I'm not sure how many people listening to this know too much about the Trayvon Martin scandal, or hoax as it's now being called. Here we are in 2019. I don't really know exactly what happened. You know, here I am in Ohio just running my mouth, but there's a lot of people who do have a really good idea of what happened during this episode that occurred in 2012. And now some new facts have arisen, and there's a lot more people who have opinions on this. And it looks like George Zimmerman is turning around and suing the family of Trayvon Martin, in addition to the attorneys that represented Trayvon, to really look for $100 million in, I guess, back pay and damages for everything that he endured during this trial and the spectacle that it was on the national stage. Going into this, what I want to do is I want to really just flesh out kind of what was perceived to have happened in 2012, and then how, you know, the greater messaging here as how this incited race relations or perceived race relations on a national scale leading up to the election of Barack Obama in 2012. And then I really want to talk about the flip side and the new facts that have really came out into light here in 2019 with the documentary, The Trayvon Hoax, as it's called. So I'm not taking any sides here. I haven't watched the documentary, but I know enough about it. I've read enough about it. I've seen a lot of interviews about it to be able to kind of distill all this information, really paint a picture for you guys as to what happened, what's going on. And then I would encourage you guys to take a look for yourselves and really see the documentary for what it's worth and review the facts again and see if this George Zimmerman fellow really has a case with this lawsuit here, because his life right now is currently in shambles, whether or not he did it to himself, because as he was alleged to have viciously killed a teenage boy, or whether or not he was framed and the entire thing was blown out of proportion and it was just merely an act of self-defense. The guy's life is definitely wrecked. It's basically over. His career is fucked. His personal relations are screwed, and apparently suffering from some sort of PTSD as a result of all this. And then the nation seemed to not be able to forget all of this. And then there's all of these racial stories thrown out there in the United States that the media runs with and attempts to divide us as a nation, which hasn't really succeeded. It just drummed up a lot of attention really in the headlines, a lot of these racial injustices or racially motivated crimes. So a lot to flesh out here. In 2019, there was really two big stories that were came to the forefront or the limelight here in terms of racial injustice, one of which was the Covington students from down in Kentucky, who were, I guess, ethnically bigoted or racially bigoted against that Native American gentleman with his drums, which turned out to be a farce, hence why the students, and particularly that one that was really keyed in on, has his lawsuit with his family pending against, who knows, the media, I think. And then the other one was the Jussie Smollett story, the double victim, the gay and the black man who basically faked an entire hate crime and made up an entire story and was outed, and I believe is still pretending like it happens, but the media has really buried that one finally. It doesn't give him any attention because, of course, that was totally made up, what happened to him. So the reason I mentioned these two stories in 2019 is because this is a byproduct of what happened to the Trayvon Martin story. Whether or not you believe it's a hoax or whether or not you believe it's a real, there were serious ramifications that came down the pike following this. And here we are in 2019, where anyone can really fake anything to accumulate attention in the headlines and really make a name for themselves and acquire a lot of martyrdom or income from it, much like Colin Kaepernick, who's really done that with all of the money and accolades he's brought down from Nike just by being the proverbial martyr and acting as if the world hates him because of him standing up to bigotry, when, in fact, nobody really hates him that much because of anything to do with that. It's more that anyone who has any hatred is viewing him as, some wannabe martyr for some racial inequality that's really just not there, and that maybe he wasn't that great of a football player, and that's why he's not on an NFL team, or maybe it's just because he's too much of an attention whore, and that's why the businesses of football want to not really give him that attention or that limelight. Just move along and find someone equally as athletic or good to be quarterback, someone who's not really that dramatic, causing attention and bringing spectacles home. But just going back into the Trayvon Martin story / hoax. So basically what ended up happening was in 2012, Trayvon Martin was killed by George Zimmerman. The facts are very clear. He was shot and killed. There was a physical skirmish that happened between both of them in 2012. And basically how the story went and what the media ran with, and how even Barack Obama even mentioned this. And it received so much attention, headlines leading up to the 2012 presidential election. And some people think that carried Barack Obama to victory. I don't necessarily think that myself, but what it definitely did is it incited a lot of these racial stories and drummed up headlines about people being treated so poorly and viciously in the streets by the ever-oppressive white man, which is just simply not true. So in 2012, it was alleged that, and this is the story the media ran with, and everybody ran with, and what everybody got fired up about, that Trayvon Martin was merely making a candy, I guess a Skittle and iced tea run to the store, and he was walking down the sidewalk on his way back, and he somehow got in some sort of argument with George Zimmerman, who the media is painting to be some white, awful, terrible person. I guess they're trying to wedge him into that box where he's actually half Hispanic. He has white's last name, but he's half Hispanic, and he was actually a registered Democrat and an advocate for children who were black, and spent time with them playing basketball and taking them out to dinner. So the guy was, he had a checkered past per the media, and he obviously has some mental issues right now, but I don't necessarily think he was the worst person in the world leading up to all of this. So he got in a skirmish with Trayvon Martin, who was simply walking home from the store with his candy and his iced tea, and George Zimmerman basically had the shit beat out of him, and Trayvon did not, because we know that because Trayvon just had bruises on his knuckles, and outside of that, there really wasn't much damage done to his body, despite the gunshot wound that really ultimately took his life. And then Zimmerman was really beat to shit. I think he was bruised up and had lacerations and all of these things. So regardless of who instigated the fight, Zimmerman got the shit beat out of him, and then Trayvon ended up dead. Well, there were no real eyewitnesses to this. The only thing that transpired was that Trayvon's girlfriend, quote unquote, was on the phone with him leading up to the shooting, and they were communicating all day about whatever they were talking about. And so she was really the last person who talked to Trayvon during that series of events. And this is where it gets kind of foggy, so I'm going to pivot here. So here we are 7 years later after this incident, 6 years after the verdict is handed down and George is acquitted. Well, some new facts have come to light, I guess. So the gentleman who made this documentary called The Trayvon Hoax is the one who unearthed all of these facts, and his name is Joel Gilbert. So the media is already jumping all over Joel Gilbert, saying that he's a conspiracy theorist and he's a right-wing hack. And I did a little research on the guy, and admittedly, getting on Alex Jones's program all of the time and drumming up things about Barack Obama's real father and all of his politically charged documentaries, some of which he calls mockumentaries. Well, yeah, you can see how people would have the perception this guy is kind of a liar and he's out there to get attention and he's politically motivated and he has an axe to grind. So I will give people that this guy does on the surface appear to be a conspiracy theorist. And I mean, as the expression goes, a broken clock is right twice a day. And for all I know, what this guy unearthed may be accurate. So I'm just going to lay out what this guy unearthed, and then I'm going to let you guys be the judge and go and watch this documentary for yourselves, much like I'm going to do this week. So in a nutshell, I can't help myself but laugh because this is insane. This is even going on. I mean, this is really making my head spin like a top. I think for any normal person, this is just totally absurd. So what Joel unearthed is this. Basically, he went through the copious amount of text messages between Trayvon and his girlfriend, and his girlfriend's name was Diamond Eugene. This was basically verified by everybody. This is something that is held as true by Joel and the setup earlier in 2012, really where the facts were laid out. I mean, everybody agrees that Diamond Eugene was indeed Trayvon's girlfriend. What Joel is asserting in this is that the woman, the young lady who sat there in the trial, was basically a stand-in for Diamond Eugene, was pretending to be Diamond Eugene, was pretending to be Trayvon's girlfriend. I mean, this sounds absolutely fucking ludicrous. It's almost too good to be true in a sense that it's this could be like a bombshell that really takes down a lot of the false narratives in the United States. It would lead the general people to not necessarily believe the mainstream media when it comes to race hoaxes these days, like Jussie Smollett and the Covington instance that occurred in 2019. So Diamond Eugene was indeed a real person. Her name was Brittany Diamond Eugene. They left out the Brittany part conveniently. She was 16 years old. She was indeed dating Trayvon. What also the media didn't really talk about much was that she was actually having another boyfriend per se. She really was playing both sides of the fence and had another boyfriend that Trayvon may not have even knew about. So Brittany Diamond Eugene was 16, and what ended up happening was the lawyer for her, this Crum guy, and I believe that's his last name, Crum, he sat down with her or talked to her over the phone or what have you, and she really was just coy about everything, and he kind of led her astray and made her verify his macro thesis narrative about what exactly transpired, and then she really just ran away from everything. She didn't want to actually get up and testify during this trial or hearing. She just didn't want any part of it, a 16-year-old. Well, coincidentally enough, she had a half-sister named Rachel Gentile, and Rachel Gentile looks nothing like Diamond Eugene. Rachel Gentile is probably twice her size and is 18 years old. So people like to pick on Rachel because she was overweight and she was fat, which she was, and she was unattractive, whereas I guess Diamond Eugene was attractive and thin, but I don't really give a fuck about that stuff. It's not really relevant to me other than they don't look similar for being half-sisters. Well, anyway, Rachel Gentile was clearly not the brightest bulb in the world, and she ended up getting put on the stand to say that she was, in fact, Diamond Eugene. She came out and said that was her nickname. She validated that during her testimony, which was very, very bizarre because a lot of people around the family and friends there knew that wasn't the case at all. Well, this fake Diamond Eugene, who was really Rachel Gentile, ended up going on and telling a few facts about how she maybe sent one text message to Trayvon that day, where in reality, this guy who did the dirty work here, Joel, made this documentary, said that Trayvon exchanged upwards of 30 texts with the true Diamond Eugene throughout the course of the day. And so what this guy did, Joel, is he just basically went through all of the texts, videos, all of these pictures, whatever they were, from Trayvon to the real Diamond Eugene, and then really took that and mirrored that with what this Rachel Gentile person was saying on the stand, and nothing really added up. I mean, admittedly, Rachel Gentile towards the end of it kind of got real quiet and said she felt uncomfortable doing it. And I'm paraphrasing, and that's testifying, that is. So the whole thing is really, really wonky. And again, this is all what Joel is saying. So whether or not this is true, I'm not sure, but it's definitely like a different take on everything. And I think it's worth watching the documentary because it truly is a bombshell if any of this stuff is true. Because you can't tell me this wasn't politically motivated on the attempt of Crum and those guys on that side of the family. And I think the HOA ended up paying out $2 million to Trayvon's family, his parents, that is. So they made out financially well as a result of all this publicity and attention. So, and honest to God, I mean, it's awful this even happened. Let's take a step back and feel bad for the parents. I mean, it's a tragedy and one that garnered so much attention and really led us down a path of this fake racial divide that exists in America because there really is none. I mean, it's just a bunch of bullshit. I mean, 99.9% of Americans do not have a racist bone in their body. I've mentioned that before. And every time the media wants to run and sensationalize a race hoax or something like that, or some death by a minority at the hands of a white person, I'm glad the public is becoming a little more dismissive, as they should, because you can't trust the CNNs and the Fox Newses on all of these things. Much like you can't really trust a lot of what Alex Jones has said, hence why he got deplatformed. And I don't agree with that at all. I think it's awful. But yeah, occasionally he might tell a kernel of truth, and that's what might be going on in this Joel guy. I mean, I don't know whether or not this guy is believable or accurate or, being forthcoming with everything, but he's definitely done his homework and his diligence, because from what it sounds like, a lot of the critics say this was really put together and really compelling. And much like I don't know, whatever the hell happened up there in Wisconsin, I forget the name of the documentary. It slips my mind right now, but there's a lot of these tales of innocence coming out many years later and clearing people's names. So these are things that do happen. And just again, looking at what this guy unearthed. So basically what he's saying is it was like the greatest witness fraud in the history of the United States, and hence why it's called the Trayvon Hoax. So no, he's not disputing that Trayvon was killed at the hands of George Zimmerman. That definitely happened. His whole thing is that Trayvon was a troubled kid, and going through his text, you could tell he loved fighting, and his brother asked him about fighting and how he could become better at fighting because Trayvon was so good, and Trayvon was really this tough guy, always mixing it up with people. And for all we know, that the real Diamond Eugene, maybe she knew that he was going to go confront someone and beat the shit out of him just for the sake of doing it in Florida, and maybe Zimmerman was that guy. So we really don't know what happened here. We do know that Trayvon was a troubled person. I mean, he had divorced parents and there was separation of the family unit, and he, sent some really weird texts to his girlfriend and vice versa. And the Twitters that were explored by Joel of his girlfriend were bizarre, and everything in this whole story doesn't really add up. And the whole Rachel Jeantel thing, if this is actually true, again, it's definitely a devastating bombshell to that of the media, who's continuing to foist upon us the idea that this was not a hoax and that this was indeed something that Zimmerman did wrong, despite him being acquitted of these charges, him getting away free in the eyes of America. Like there was no repercussions of all this. I mean, the guy's life is ruined. So if this stand-in witness is actually true, I mean, Zimmerman definitely has a lawsuit. I think the attorney who was prosecuting against him should go to jail in addition to being disbarred. I think there's a lot of people. I think that there might be a miscarriage of justice here, that the state of Florida might need to be held accountable, or people there in government. I mean, this whole thing is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, the media took it and they said Zimmerman was they're trying to make it seem like he was like the whitest guy on the face of the earth, and that Trayvon was this blackest guy on the face of the earth. And this is the tension that was here. And he was just cold-bloodedly out there to kill Trayvon. The whole thing was just spun as this insane narrative, and it divided the country, and everyone thought that Zimmerman was an asshole, and maybe he is an asshole. I don't know. I mean, it could have been a self-defense like this Joel guy saying in this documentary. So it's definitely worth visiting this documentary and checking it out. But circling back again, so this is again what this Joel guy unearthed in the Trayvon Hoax documentary. He said that Rachel Jeantel was manipulated by the attorney Crum, who is the attorney for Trayvon's family, and that she literally couldn't read that well. She was sort of illiterate, so that they basically had her read a letter or something to do, like along the lines of like a letter to Trayvon that she, I guess, wrote to him at one point. And then this Joel guy, he got like a penmanship or linguistics type person in there, and basically they verified that she couldn't even have wrote that. And then it's also ironic because she couldn't even read what she wrote. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And she like basically was reading at like a 4th or 5th grade level for someone who's 18 years old. So that was kind of pathetic. I mean, she was easily manipulated by this attorney. That's definitely a fact. And again, nothing adds up. She was saying that she sent one text to Trayvon and that she goes by Diamond Eugene when she didn't. And that, I mean, so again, what really happened was there was 30 texts between real Diamond Eugene, the half-sister of Rachel Jeantel, and Trayvon, and there's only one text she was saying that she sent to Trayvon as her quote-unquote boyfriend. I mean, the whole thing was bizarre. And then, I guess through the text messages, it was pretty easy to pick up on from what this Joel guy says in his documentary, the Trayvon Hoax, that apparently, like, there was pictures sent, right? I mean, there was sexting. It was a highly sexualized, sexually charged relationship. So this 16-year-old, the real Diamond Eugene, was sending pictures of herself to Trayvon. And the pictures were not Rachel Jeantel. I mean, any person could really figure that out. I mean, unless you were blind. And then above and beyond that, this Joel guy goes on to say, the InfoWars disciple gentleman here, Alex Jones's buddy. And again, I'm not trying to say that to be mean, because this is a wild story and maybe unearthed a bombshell. And I think it's pretty crazy, mind-altering journalism. He goes on to say that there was like a port of the cell phones that basically they kind of switched out the number of the real Diamond Eugene cell phone to that of Rachel Jeantel's. And I think at one point on the stand, or when Rachel Jeantel was speaking to some sort of prosecutor or somebody, that she kind of said something along the lines of, well, yeah, now it's my cell phone. Well, now it's my cell phone. As if like the number of the cell phone wasn't quite hers to begin with. So that kind of made that a little bit dicey. So these little like mouth slips that she has. And then towards the end of it all, she kind of regrets the testimony, as I've alluded to. And for all I know, there was so much pressure out there in the community for Rachel Jeantel to make sure this, ended up in the hands of the good guys that came down on the side of justice for Trayvon, that maybe she felt like she just said what needed to be said and she moved along and played along with the shtick and the charade and it'll all go away. And then maybe the real Diamond Eugene was sitting there like, look, I don't want any part of this. Also, I don't want it to come to light that I had another boyfriend in addition to Trayvon, which makes everything messier and even more, devastating for the family that Trayvon had someone he cared about and she really was doing the runaround on him. But despite all this, the entire thing is really messy. So the broader point here is this, and this is where I'm going to come down with my opinion, whether or not this documentary is true. And I'm starting to believe that a lot of it is true, because it's pretty hard to dismiss everything this guy's saying. So I'm going to watch the documentary for myself and see what becomes of it, because George Zimmerman filed a $100 million lawsuit really at the hands of this guy who made this documentary because it was helpful. It was almost like a it was a pass to the guy. It was a give and go. It's like, okay, this documentary's out there. Here's the truth, George, that maybe you didn't know about this stand-in witness. And now you should run with this because you need to collect the damages because your life has been ruined so much at the expense of this politically charged narrative in the media. So my real opinion here is this. I don't know if it's true. I don't want to say it's true without watching the documentary and going down this. And we'll see what happens with the lawsuit the Zimmermans put forth. And we'll see if this Crum attorney goes to jail. We'll see if people will be held responsible in government for this. I mean, they probably won't. I mean, there'll probably be a slap on the wrist, which is horrifying because this was such a big deal leading up to the 2012 election. And it's caused this really spillover effect to these racial hoaxes and nonsense that goes on in the media. So I want to make it clear. As a libertarian, as a right-leaning guy, as someone who stands up for liberty and someone who stands up for individual rights, we don't have the racial problems that the media foists upon us all of the time, that they beat into our head, that, my God, we're so racist, and it's almost like pre-Martin Luther King days, and we really need to figure all of this out. I mean, people in the 70s, 80s, 90s on upwards were not that racist at all. I mean, they were real peaceable. I mean, you talk to people of that era and they say, yeah, if someone were to drop an N-bomb or say something horrible about someone of color, of course, everyone's going to rally to the defense of that person who is being ostracized or bullied or victimized or whatever was going on. I mean, it's absurd that now all of a sudden we're saying in 2019 that we have these huge racial divides and problems and that everybody who identifies as a minority or ethnic minority or racial minority, that they all of a sudden need to vote liberal. And by all means, the liberals are going to, fix everything because they're the ones who sympathize with all of these racially motivated stories out there. I mean, maybe, I guess, minorities have it a little bit worse in the United States. I mean, sure they do from an income perspective and where they're brought up in the inner cities that are led by liberal mayors in the states that are run by liberal governors. Well, yeah, of course they're hurting black people. But to say that average everyday people are out there just hating black people, minorities, or protected classes every day in their sleep, and they just get off to this and they want to see someone like Trayvon killed in the streets. I mean, this is just awful. And that's really what the media is putting out there, perpetrating. So again, people need to realize this is why liberty is so important, because really the media is complicit with the left-wing agenda. The left dominates Hollywood. They dominate the media. They dominate academic settings. They dominate everything because government is the monopoly force over our lives. So if you want to get in good with the government and power, you kind of have to parrot these narratives that the government are putting on the public to control people. So the government's basically saying we have all of this racial problems, inadequacies, and injustices. We need to do something about that. So the people who are mobilized, who can garner all of this power and this money and these bureaucracies and departments and whatever, they're social justice puppeteering from the tops of corporations. Well, yeah, of course they have to get close to government and bow to the government there on the altar of political correctness. This is what they have to do. So it should come as no surprise that the major media companies are complicit in stoking this fire, especially the CNNs and MSNBCs of the world. You got to see through this bullshit. So I personally have a lot of problems with all of this. I don't like all of these deaths and stories have to become politically motivated all of the time because that's the world we live in. I mean, when you deal with the left, politics is their entire life. If you disagree with them, it's almost like you're a bad person and you need not hang out with this family or friend group. It's just so awful. So the situation is crazy. I figured I'd flesh some of this stuff out. I mean, I really want you guys to take a look at the documentary. I myself am going to do that. And hell, maybe I'll provide a recap of my analysis of what actually transpired in that documentary versus real life facts. But like anything, you can never really know what goes on when there's not a witness. But what you do know is there is politically charged people on both sides of the aisle, much like the, O.J. Simpson case or any sort of race riot in the United States. It's almost like people just need to immediately, viscerally take sides and condemn the other person as evil. It's just so fucking weird. I mean, see the facts as they are. It's crazy the spectacle the media will run with, especially when it pertains to race relations in the United States. It's god awful. I mean, I guess it's the byproduct of a melting pot, but we're damn lucky to have that melting pot where we allow everybody in. I mean, that's a part of capitalism. A part of capitalism is allowing everybody to come into the confines of your quote unquote state or your country and allowing them to thrive and succeed and have the liberty to control their own destiny. And that's a beautiful thing about capitalism. It knows no race. It knows no ethnicity. It knows no gender. It knows no sexual orientation. So capitalism is the cure to all of this totalitarianism, this big government, these big media companies who are insulated from competition and who are buddy-buddy with the government. yeah, that is not capitalism. That is totalitarianism. It's really a version of socialism. It's what these leftists really love. I mean, it's like the more cowbell skit with Will Ferrell from SNL. I mean, government getting bigger is essentially the more cowbell, more cowbell, more cowbell. And that's exactly what leftists want. They want the Bernie Sanders of the world. They want the more cowbell. They want to identify as government that doesn't work and is broken, and they want to double down on that as if that's going to solve anything. I mean, that's the scary part, too, about having a country as big as ours that just doesn't culturally agree on a lot of things. And there's really two countries. There's the coasts, and then there's Middle America. I mean, why do we need 350 million people screaming about these things? I think nullification, some secession of states, some decentralization is really the cure to all of this. It's helping the healing process. I mean, the Trayvon thing wouldn't have nearly blown up to 350 million people during an election circuit trying to get Barack Obama, a black person, elected. And that reminds me of another thing. I mean, they're talking about Zimmerman as if he's a white person. Well, why is Barack Obama not white? I mean, he's equally as white as George Zimmerman. He's half black, but then the media projected as if we have our first African-American in office. So everything is just really spun how the media wants it to be spun. And it makes me sick that the left is so quick to hate someone when they don't really know the story. So hopefully this documentary makes people think a little bit and really exposes this Crumb guy and this attorney and the complicit of the Florida state government and the feds around all of this, because I think the FBI was actually implicated at one point. So hopefully if this Joel guy actually is not the conspiracy theorist that he's made out to be, and there's some like facts to all of this, hopefully Zimmerman gets his day of reckoning and he gets the compensation he deserves, the monetary compensation that will alleviate him of some of the stress in his life, and maybe he can move abroad and get the fuck out of the United States and resurrect his life in some way, shape, or form, or at least clear his name. So I don't really know, but I wanted again to spend my typically half-hour podcast giving a few thoughts on all of this. So if you like the show, keep on subscribing, show it to your friends. We're really going to hit a highly target marketed ad campaign out there on the airwaves. You guys will see a lot of this. I just want to get more people interested, get this perspective out there of the libertarian, conservatarian type worldview when it comes to everything. But I guess in this case, the racial relations and potentially the bombshell with the Trayvon Hoax documentary that has just been released a few months back. So thank you very much for listening, and we will be back for episode number 18 on Friday. Thank you.